Okay, hi all. So we are going to continue with supply. Okay, so we did the demand for the first part. We are going to continue with the supply. The quantity supplied of any good is the amount that sellers are willing and able to sell. Okay, so this is the seller side. Law of supply is the claim that the quantity supplied of a good rises when the price of the good rises, other things equal. So supply schedule, it's a table that shows the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity supplied. So example, Starbucks supply of lattes. Okay, remember demand was the Helen's latte demand. So at the end, we are going to look at the market price for that. Okay, suppose supply schedule is like this. If the price of latte is 0, quantity supplied is 0. If the price of latte is 1, quantity supplied is 3, etc. Okay. So as you can see, as the price of lattes increase, the quantity supplied increase. So which is the law of supply. As price increases, quantity supplied increases. Okay. So if it is 0, 0, if it is 1, 3, if the price is 1, the quantity supplied is 3. If the price of latte is 2, quantity supplied is 6, etc. Okay, so this is our supply line. And then what is the difference between market supply versus individual supply? For the market supply, we are going to sum all individual supply curves horizontally as we did in the demand curve, market demand curve. Quantity supplied in the market is the sum of all quantities supplied by all sellers at each price. Suppose Starbucks and Jitters are the only two sellers in this market. Okay, so for these prices, Starbucks supply levels are like this, and Jitters supplies are like this. In order to find the market supply, what are we going to do? For each given price, we are going to sum quantity supplied by Starbucks and Jitters. Okay, market supply will be like this for each price levels. And then how are you going to draw those market supply curve? We are going to draw the aggregate supply. If the price is 0, it is quantity supplied is 0. If the price is 1, quantity supplied is 5, etc. Okay, so this is the market supply curve. Okay, supply curve shifters, what are those? The supply curve shows how price affects quantity supplied, other things being equal. So if there's a change in the price, quantity supplied will change. So there will be a movement along the curve. So supply curve will not shift with the price change. Okay. These other things are non-price determinants of supply, and changes in them shift the supply curve. For instance, input prices. Okay, anything that affect how the good is produced will affect the supply curve. Input prices are going to affect how many goods will be produced at the end, right? So, for instance, wages are input prices. Labor can be input, right? So, wages is the price of the labor, price of the raw materials. A fall in input prices makes production more profitable at each output price. So firms supply a larger quantity at each price. Okay, and the supply curve shifts to the right. Okay, so if there's a decrease in the input prices, supply curve will shift to the right. Okay, suppose the price of milk falls, at each price, the quantity of lattes supplied will increase by 5. Let's say this for this example. Okay, what is the other ingredient used for the latte? Coffee, right? So if there's a decrease in the price of coffee, we will have a similar shift in the supply curve for lattes. Okay, so technology determines how much inputs are required to produce a unit of output. So a cost-saving technological improvement has the same effect as a fall in input prices. So it's going to shift supply curve to the right. Okay, an increase in the similarly the number of buyers. If there's an increase in the number of sellers, quantity supplied at each price will increase, right? So we are going to In order to find the market supply, we are summing up each individual seller's supply levels, right, for a given price. So it's going to shift the supply curve to the right as well. Expectations. So events in the Middle East lead to expectations of higher oil prices. So in response, owners of Texas oil fields reduce supply now, save some inventory to sell later at a higher price. Okay, so if you expect higher price later on, you can, so this is not legal though. I mean, they did the similar thing for the masks, right? So remember, masks are required to be wear. So mask producers hold them by expecting an increase in their price, and the government intervened. Okay, so so this is the real world example. So while studying this course, please think the other outward examples for the examples that we are giving, right? So in general, sellers may adjust supply when their expectations of future prices change. Okay, so variables influence the seller's price, so it causes a movement along the curve. It's not going to shift the supply curve. Input prices will shift, technology will shift, number of sellers will shift, and expectations will shift the supply curve. Okay, so draw a supply curve for a tax return preparation software. What happens to it in each of the following scenarios? Retailers cut the price of the software. It's not gonna, if there's a price change for the software, what will happen? Quantity supplied will drop. There will be a movement along the curve. Okay, supply curve will be the same. Okay, a technological advance allows the software to be produced at a lower cost. Then at the same price, supply will shift to the right. Okay, so if the production will be higher, so it can be producible at a lower cost, then supply can increase. Professional tax return preparers raises the price of the services they provide. Okay, it's not related to supply. Okay, so it's related to demand. So professional tax return preparers are like a substitutes for the people who needs to prepare the tax returns, right? So this is the demand side. So A and B are related to supply. Okay, we said that. C is not going to affect the supply curve at all. It's going to affect the demand curve. Okay. So fall in the price of the tax return software. So S curve doesn't shift, move down along the curve to a lower P and lower Q. This will happen, as we said. Okay. So following the cost of producing the software, S curve shifts to the right. At each price, Q increases. Okay. And then professional preparers raises their price. This shifts the demand curve for the tax preparation software, not the supply curve. Okay. So supply, and so we did the demand side and we did the supply side. Now we are going to look at the intersection of those in order to look at market equilibrium. Okay. So equilibrium is there are two dimensions in here, right? Price and quantity. So when we are talking about the equilibrium, you're going to have two things: equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. P has reached the level where quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded at the equilibrium. Okay, where supply and demand intersects. Okay, so this is equilibrium point. And in here, so we have demand schedule on the right and supply schedule on again the last column in here. So they intersect at this point, which is going to give you the equilibrium. Equilibrium price is the price that equates quantity supplied with the quantity demanded, as we said. Okay, which will be 3. Okay, in here. Equilibrium quantity, the quantity supplied and quantity demanded at the equilibrium price. Okay. And then surplus. Okay. So there can be three possible things that can happen in a market. Okay. Market price. So market price can be above the equilibrium price or below the equilibrium price or at the equilibrium price. Okay. If market price is above the equilibrium price, quantity supplied will be higher than the quantity demanded. Okay. So for instance, if price is 5, quantity supplied will be higher than quantity demanded. Okay. So the difference between quantity supplied and quantity demanded is going to give you the surplus. Okay. So this is surplus. Okay. Similarly, so facing a surplus, sellers try to increase the sales by cutting the price, okay? And as the price decreases, quantity demanded will increase, so surplus will shrink, okay? And the price will move down to the equilibrium price, okay? Okay. So surplus will shrink as the sellers decrease the price. It's gonna decrease, surplus will decrease until it is zero, until to the equilibrium point. Okay, prices continue to fall until market reaches equilibrium point. Okay, shortage or excess demand, so it happens when the market price is below the equilibrium price. Okay, suppose when the price is 1, quantity demanded is higher than quantity supplied. In order to find quantity demanded at that price, you're gonna come to the demand curve, right? So as this red dotted line is doing, okay? And quantity demanded is 21 lattes and quantity supplied is 5 lattes, resulting in a shortage of 16 lattes, okay? So what will happen in that case? In that case, price should increase, right? So facing a shortage, sellers raise the price, causing quantity demanded to fall, quantity supply to rise. So excess demand will decrease. In other words, shortage will decrease until it reaches to the equilibrium. Okay, until it reaches to the equilibrium. Okay. 3 steps analyzing changes in price. To determine the effects of any event, decide whether the event shifts the supply curve or demand curve or both. Okay. Decide in which direction curve shifts and use supply demand diagram to see how the shift changes equilibrium, price, and quantity. Okay. For instance, market for hybrid cars. Think about market for hybrid cars. So this is the price of hybrid cars. This is the quantity of hybrid cars. Okay. This is the demand. This is the supply. This is the equilibrium price and quantity. It is the point where they intersect. So suppose there's the shift in demand. Okay. So event to be analyzed, increase in the price of gas. Okay. If there's an increase in the price of gas, okay, then what will happen? Gas and other normal cars are complements to each other. Okay, complements to each other. And so if there is an increase in the price of the gas, okay, demand curve shifts because price of gas affects demand for hybrids. Okay. So supply curve doesn't shift because price of gas doesn't affect the cost of producing hybrids, okay? Demand curve shifts where? Demand curve shifts to the right because high gas price makes hybrids more attractive relative to the other cars, okay? So instead of paying, cars going with the gas versus cars hybrid, they are substitutes to each other, right? Substitutes to each other. So if there is if the price of gas increases, that means cost of the other cars increasing, the price of the other cars are increasing, which makes hybrid cars more demand at a higher demand. Okay, so it's going to shift the demand curve for hybrid cars to the right. Then the new equilibrium point will be the intersection of the supply and D2. Okay, so this shift causes an increase in the price and quantity of the hybrid cars. Okay, so this is new equilibrium point is P2 and Q2. So at that point, there will be an increase in the price and quantity. Okay, when P rises, producers supply a larger quantity of hybrids, even though the S curve hasn't shifted. Okay. So always be careful to distinguish between a shift in a curve and movement along the curve. Okay. So as we said earlier, movement along the curve happens with the price changes, either in the supply curve or the demand curve. Other things will affect the demand or supply curve. Okay. Terms for shift versus movement along the curve. Change in supply. So it means that a shift in the supply curve occurs when a non-price determinant of supply, changes like technology or costs, will lead to that. Change in the quantity supply, it means that a movement along the curve, okay, occurs with the price change. Okay, change in demand, a shift in demand curve occurs when a non-price determinant of demand changes, like income or number of buyers. What are the other things? Expectations, price of the other goods, tastes, etc. And change in the quantity demanded, it's going to happen. A movement along demand curve occurs when P changes. Okay, so a shift in supply. New technology reduces the cost of producing hybrid cars. Again, so we are in the hybrid car market. Okay, we are analyzing hybrid car market. So if there's a decrease in the cost of production, then supply will shift, right? To where? Supply will shift to right. Okay, so you are going to have a new curve. With that, what will happen? Equilibrium price will decrease, equilibrium quantity will increase. Okay, step one is S curve shifts because event affects the cost of production. Demand will stay the same, and production technology is not one of the factors that affect the demand. Okay, S shifts to the right because event reduces the cost, makes the production more profitable at any given price. And okay, so at step 3, and this at the new equilibrium, price is lower, equilibrium quantity is higher. QT is higher than Q1. Okay, if both of them shifts, okay, so price of gas rises and new technology reduces the production cost, okay, then both of them will shift. Okay, you are going to have demand to shift right, supply to shift right. Then what will happen? Okay, so let's look at it. Okay, so how are you gonna, so we know for certain that equilibrium quantity increased. Okay, the new intersection, the intersection of the red lines are the right of the Q1, so it's gonna increase. But how about the price, equilibrium price? You cannot say anything about the equilibrium price unless you know the magnitude of the shifts for supply and demand curves. Okay, so Q rises, but effect on P ambiguous. If demand increases more than supply, P rises. Okay, if it is vice versa, P decreases. Okay. 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 Use the 3-step method to analyze the effect of each event on the equilibrium price and quantity of music downloads. So a fall in the price of CDs. Okay, so we are gonna look at analyze the effect of each equilibrium price and quantity. It's gonna affect the demand curve, right? So because CDs and music downloads are substitutes, if there's a decrease in the price of CD, then demand for that will increase and demand for the music downloads will fall down. Okay, so we are going to come to that. Sellers of music downloads negotiate a reduction in the royalties they must pay for each song they sell. This is again the input price for the music downloads, and event A and event B. So event A will affect the demand, right? Because it's gonna affect the price of substitute. Event B will affect the supply. Event C is about if both supply and demand change at the same time. Okay, so this is the market for the music download. We draw the demand curve, we draw the supply curve just randomly. Okay, they intersect at P1, Q1. This is the initial equilibrium point. Okay, so with the fall in the price of CDs, demand curve shifts. Okay, and demand curve shifts to the left. Why? Because CDs and music downloads are substitutes. If there's a decrease in the price of CDs, demand for that will increase, and demand for the music downloads will decrease. Okay, then equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity decreased with only a change in A. Okay, in the scenario A. Okay, now let's look at what happens in the second case. Fall in the cost of royalties. So this royalties are part of the seller's cost. Okay, then which means that the cost of production decreased. What's going to happen then? Supply will shift to right. Okay, so the cost of production decreases, supply will shift to right. Then equilibrium price will decrease and equilibrium quantity increased. Okay, now what happens if both of them happens, A and B happens? Okay, so the demand shifts left. Okay, price shifts right. Now P falls for sure. Okay, so P falls for sure. So you are gonna have a D2 curve in here as well. Okay, price is gonna fall for sure, but you cannot say anything about the equilibrium quantity. The effect on quantity is ambiguous. The fall in the demand reduces Q, the increase in supply increases Q. Okay, so depending on the magnitude of the shifts, equilibrium quantity will change. Okay, so how prices allocate resources? This is one of the 10 principles from chapter 1. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. In market economies, prices adjust to balance supply and demand. These equilibrium prices are the signals that guide economic decisions and thereby allocate scarce resources. Okay, a competitive market has many buyers and sellers, each of whom has little or no influence on the market price, and economists use the supply and demand model to analyze competitive markets. Okay, the downward sloping demand curve reflects the law of demand, which states the quantity buyers' demand of a good depends negatively on the goods price. Besides price, demand depends on buyers' income, tastes, expectations, the price of substitutes and complements, and number of buyers. If one of these factors change, demand curve shifts. The upward sloping supply curve reflects the law of supply, which states the quantity seller's supply depends on positively on the goods price. Other determinants of supply include input prices, technology, expectations, and the number of sellers. Changes in these factors shifts the supply curve. Okay, so the intersection of supply and demand curve determines the market equilibrium. At the equilibrium price, quantity supplied equals to quantity demanded. If the market price is above equilibrium, a surplus results, which causes prices to fall. If the market price is below equilibrium, a shortage results, which causes the market price to rise. Okay, we can use supply and demand diagram to analyze the effects of any event on a market. First, determine whether the event shifts one or both curves. Second, determine direction of the shifts. Third, compare the new equilibrium to the initial one. Okay, to understand the effect of those events on equilibrium price. In market economies, prices are the signals that guide economic decisions and allocate scarce resources. Okay, that's all for this chapter. Please let me know if you have any questions.